First video of 2025. If you're wondering where I've been helping the students in the school. I've been guiding some really amazing musicians as they progress along the path to comprehensive musical mastery. I wanted to make this video just to show you guys what a typical day inside Systems for Creation looks like. So you're about to see a live office hours recording where I, along with some other legends of the program, get deep into the mentality of musical development. See, if you haven't figured it out already, mentality is everything, right? Mentality of practice, mentality of musical development. These are things we address in the school. We literally have a mentality curriculum because it's not enough just to know the first principles, right? It's not enough just to know how to sequence triad configurations. You need to understand the logic of sequencing the first principles, let alone knowing exactly what those first principles are. So in the very beginning of the lesson, we're discussing how composition is integral to your daily practice routine because it's through composition that we're expanding our vocabulary, and as a result, our technique expands to support that new vocabulary. And this is a mentality that goes back to literally the 1700s, right? At least as far as we know. May go back farther than that, but think about the legendary Baroque composers like Bach, Chopin. Those are a couple examples we use in the lesson, but the thing that Bach and Chopin and many, many other Baroque composers understood was that composition and improvisation are the exact same thing, right? So what are these guys doing in their daily musical practice, right? They're composing and then performing the things that they compose, and then that feeds back into them being able to compose in real time, aka improvise. Yeah, that's right. The OG Baroque composers were masterful improvisers. So if that's news to you, look it up, or I'll probably just put this right on the screen so you can see. Yeah, this is common knowledge, but it's really important to understand that because it gives us insight into practice of music, like how that actually works. You have to understand that improvisation and composition exist in a single unified mentality, and that mentality is defined as the mentality of musical practice. And of course, that's part of the syllabus in Systems for Creation. We discussed this concept of the dynamic etude, okay? The dynamic etude is a major hack in technical development. The concept is essentially just taking a form, right? So a form could be a jazz standard, it could be a fugue, it could be an original composition, any form. Something that has a clear beginning and end point with a harmonic sequence that can repeat on itself, right? That's a form. So a dynamic etude is when you take a form and map out pathways, right? And along those pathways, there are slight variations that you can take, but they're all clearly defined variations that you are consciously aware of as you're working through this dynamic etude. This is teaching you the mentality of improvisation. Going back to that idea of just having a deep bag of tricks, right? Because the real name of the game as an improviser or composer and everything in between, it's about that deep bag of tricks. So dynamic etudes show us how to literally deepen the bag of tricks. And that's discussed in detail on this live recording you're about to watch. Additionally, we get into the fretboard mastery curriculum, okay? So that connects to our dynamic etude practice, and we see how the principles of fretboard mastery, which is a specifically defined curriculum, integrate into the principles of dynamic etudes, and then also how the principles of triad configurations and triadic voice leading also apply to dynamic etude. So you have this dynamic etude concept in the middle. Over here, you got fretboard mastery, which is essentially just understanding the full range of the fretboard and having clearly defined pathways to get you from the bottom end of the range, the top end of the range, and vice versa, right? And then the triad configurations are just understanding literally, open, closed, root position, first inversion, second inversion of all triads, how those voice lead one to the next, right?
Yeah, okay.
The spirit is moving through you at that point. Deep first principle stuff, right? I mean, this lesson alone will be an absolutely paradigm-shattering avalanche of cosmic enlightenment. But I'll definitely warn you that it's going to open up a massive can of worms, and that can of worms is probably going to keep you awake at night unless you get some guidance on how to actually deal with the implications of everything that's in this video. So without further ado, enjoy this completely unedited, 100% raw, live lesson from Systems for Creation. See you on the other side. Pathway construction, right? So this is that dynamic etude principle that we've written about in Mentality of Practice. So dynamic etude is everything. So underlying principle of the dynamic etude is thinking about how someone like Bach or Chopin or any composer of melody, could be Coltrane, because that's more of improvisational. But the reason I bring up Chopin, for example, and Bach, for example, is because they weren't specifically choosing to improvise or compose. They were doing both equally, and their ability to compose compounded into improvisation. So for anyone who didn't, Jerome, you know, we've talked about this, is just that idea that the classical musicians from those times, from the 1700s, 1800s, it's common knowledge, notorious knowledge, they were mind-melting improvisers. Like Chopin improvised a lot of those famous like performances for the king and all this. It's like a joke secret. And the classical musicians lose their minds when they realize, what, like the pianists of today, they can't fathom that, right? They can't do that's it hurts them to think about it. But what we think about is that's what we're doing when we're developing this dynamic etude principle. It's you have clearly defined pathways. You're at once composing them, at once executing them, and you're seeing like inevitable variations based on those pathways that you're constructing. So back to the basic of, right, your inevitable variations of a first inversion open D flat major. Right? Okay, there's a pathway with a whole bunch of areas to go. Do the same thing. Do the same thing. That's all we're talking about. So now, once we've kind of just come familiar with that basic framework, those basic components, there's where the rhythm, okay? And as we were just saying, the quantum leap to rhythm every time is not to be underestimated, right? So we're doing this with like kind of simple grips here, but imagine when this gets complex with like all kinds of different stuff that's possible, right? This can get infinitely complex. So what we're doing right here is establishing that mentality when we kind of move our way into performance practice and involve rhythm and respect that it's quite a leap, and just, you know, take it slow. And for example, do things like repeating one chord for a long time, right? And you can even start by just playing the same thing for a long time. Now, what the key here is, when you're starting this process, I want to encourage everyone to always tap their foot when they're starting this. I'm not encouraging people to use a metronome. I'm encouraging to tap a foot, because you want to anchor your coordination into your own inner pulse, right? The metronome is a crutch. It will help you to feel time. So if you want to feel time, use a metronome, but very quickly let the metronome go and move to your foot. And so what that looks like in the absolute day one beginning is this. And we're using our dynamic etude with the inevitable variations, thinking like Chopin here, and I'm tapping my foot, and I'm playing a rhythm that I can easily play while I tap my foot. And I'm going to repeat the same chord, the same first inversion D flat major open. I'm not going to go to another chord. Right? I'm going to go 3 and 4 and. Only when I'm ready do I do the next thing, right? That's the foundation of it all, right? So now that we see like where we jump from like that first level, now we're going to talk about some more complex rhythms. We're going to jump into that, and we're going to talk a lot about rhythm right now. So before we talk about that stuff and where we develop rhythm from, are we clear on how we start integrating rhythm into the practice of the pathway of the dynamic etude? Yeah, we for sure you guys are. Okay. Any questions about any of that stuff at all? Okay, good, good, good. All right. So here's the rhythm part. Kate, I'm curious to get your just your thoughts on your concept of rhythm. Like, how do you think about rhythm? Like, any questions you have about rhythm, anything. I want to get some perspective of where you're at with rhythm. You played a little bit of rhythm for me the other day. I heard it and I was like, okay, you know some rhythm. You know some rhythm. So I'm not saying that like I don't want to talk to you like you're a total beginner. So just give me some reference point for like your concept of rhythm right now. You can unmute. Sorry, I muted you so you can.
There we
There you
go.
go.
Yeah, so I don't know. I definitely feel with the just tapping your foot just all the time. Like when I'm listening to songs or whatever, I'll just be tapping my foot, or when I'm playing songs, I'll be
Yep.
tapping it, or just something to get that rhythm inside of my brain and in my heart so I can just feel it all the time without thinking about it, or like recall a tempo of the song if I've listened to it a couple times and get
Gotcha.
something like that, just start tapping it. Um, and then I've noticed with myself, like with the books that I've been teaching out of and stuff, it's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of like basic rhythms. So
Mm-hmm.
breaking
Mm-hmm.
out into like syncopated rhythms and stuff that I've seen you doing a lot in the video lessons has been a little bit harder to break those out
Perfect.
with just the feel, because I've got the feel for stace or right on the beat rhythms, but I haven't been able to develop that feel for the syncopated rhythms.
Yep. 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 Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Perfect. So that's yeah. That's the big other leap, right? So you have a couple of leaps here.
Yep.
You have the leap into playing actual rhythm, which you can understand as a teacher. I'm sure that is a big leap for people in the
Mhm.
beginning. But if you guide them and you support them,
Yeah,
they
for
can they
sure.
can totally make that leap, no problem. But it's definitely a big
Yep.
leap in the beginning for a lot of people. So then there's that same
Mhm.
similar leap into syncopated and how complex that becomes, is including odd
Mhm.
meters and stuff. But here's the first thing: we're not even going to talk about odd meters potentially ever, unless you want to,
Yeah.
because all
Yep.
here's a like Jerome knows this from like ancient first principles is like, man, everything is actually in 4/4, so you might as well just realize that. And
Yeah.
that's such a conflicting, like, horrifying statement. So many people would have a you could argue with that all day, but it's better to just feel 4/4 and then
Mhm.
start feeling 3/4 and never
Yep.
even really worry about 5/7s and stuff like that, because maybe you'll write a song in 7, maybe you'll write a song in 5, but it would be like a weird decision to make, I feel. So you'll see what I mean by
Yeah.
that as we develop. I don't know. I want to. I guess my point is like, don't glorify. Actually, I'll say it, but Jerome, you got a point, I'm sure. But just don't
Mhm.
glorify the odd meters like all these people do. You know what I'm? That's my point. Like
Yep.
with Tool and stuff, it's like I
Yeah.
love Tool and everything, but it's just like, dude,
Uh
writing
huh.
4/4, you are nowhere near finishing. You can write endless masterpieces in 4/4 for billions of years to come. That's what I want to be clear on. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, what do you think,
Okay.
Jerome? Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I think that this is what makes so many like prog rock and metal bands music so weak, because it's just like this, like it's a really cool exercise in complication and all of these fancy things, but it comes at the detriment of like the overall flow.
I think he's nailed it. I would
Yeah.
agree.
We
People might like
Yeah, I can see
beat
it.
you up for that.
It's funny. I was just
Uh
checking out
huh.
this Bill Bruford tune,
Oh yeah.
and it's like it's like textbook Meshuggah. It's, do you know the one I can't stand the heat, or can't stand the heat?
Is that on his album or is it on the Holdsworth
Yeah,
album?
it's on
It's
his
on his?
album.
Yeah, I know that
Yeah,
track. Yeah, yeah. I just haven't listened to it in like 2 or 5 years.
because it's
Yeah.
like it starts off, and like there's the actual. I mean, I'm breaking it down into
Yeah.
these like cells, and so of
Yeah.
course there's it's a grouping of 7 or a grouping of 6, and so you might have these 13s and 7s. But
Yeah.
then when it
But
comes back in, it's all within a 4/4, and it's been
Mhm.
kind of crazy trying to notate it, because notating it in 7, it's sometimes it's clear, but then it still has this feel.
no, but
Yeah.
you know Bruford for sure because they're all part of that same lineage. And Cade, this is like already cutting to the quick of the cosmos, like day whatever of school. But
Yeah. Uh
it's
huh.
the the idea with what Jerome is talking about is like, so there's this idea, and this is what I call Meshuggah framework. There's lessons in this in the school. This is T-high Meshuggah rhythmic framework stuff. It's this basic idea that you're playing in 4/4, right? But in 4/4, you're doing groupings of 7s, 5s, 13s, 11s, 9s, and 6s, you know, and those moving against a backbeat. So now we're in, like, you brought us right to the point of everything. So what does that even start to be? Well, it's like this, right? So back to tapping my foot, right? Because when I'm tapping my foot, I'm only thinking about it in 4/4, you know? So, and because I'm trying to be basic on purpose, but watch what happens when I think about this idea of groupings against 4/4. So if I have eighth notes, think about that as like I'm grouping in 2s, right? So it's like 1 and 2 and I'm like grouping in 2s, right? So it's like 2 against 4. It's like normal stuff, you know? Watch what happens like grouping 3s, right? 3 and 4 and... I'm feeling the grouping of 3 display. I'm playing all in 4/4. Yep, I'm playing all in 4/4. But inevitably, I can't even not play in 4/4. I can't even do it, right? So I'm playing in 3, but I was playing in 4/4. You said it. You said it. You said it. So what's going on there is I'm feeling the displacement of the grouping move against my foot. So a different part of the grouping is landing in different parts of the measure, right? This is we're gonna unpack all this stuff, is recording and everything, but you know, this will take time to sink in. But we're talking about this concept of grouping subdivisions, right? So eighth notes are subdivisions, you got 16th notes are subdivisions, you got triplets that can be subdivisions, quarter notes, it's all these ideas of subdivisions, grouping subdivisions. And where all of the odd rhythms come from, the 7s, the 9s, the 11s, the 13s, the 23s, those come from just groupings against 4/4.
Okay. Yeah, because like, what, I don't know, 13, there's some 3 at the end against that 4/4, and then you would have to fit that, the other 10 beats into 4/4 and some, like, what, can't think of the quadruplets or whatever, fit those against the 4.
All right. No, so not exactly.
Okay.
You're gonna. So this is the cycle. Now we're getting into cycle theory. Okay, so we're getting deep into rhythm right now. I'll give you an analogy of something that's gonna make everything make sense instantly, but it's gonna be a monstrous jump from where we just are, but you're gonna understand it. Like I could tell you this and you'll understand it like immediately, but the implications will be like, no, like it'll be like you just got sucked into a bad trip. So before we do that, is there anything we should get clear on with regards to syncopation without considering this whole can of worms I'm potentially about to open here? Because you said syncopation. The levels of syncopation are infinite. And I guess I want to be clear with, like, is there anything you want to address kind of on the closer to the surface of where you are at with syncopation and playing and things like that, before we potentially open up a whole other paradigm?
So syncopation, you're just playing on the offbeats, and it's simple for eighth notes when you're just doing that against quarter notes, but when it comes to doing that with 16th notes and playing 16th notes syncopated, that's where I find a bigger problem of feeling it, because I can feel the 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and feel that and beat, but once you break it into the 4E and I'm not sure where you would throw those in there.
Nailed it. Great. Okay, let's just talk about that still. We're gonna get to this other crazy stuff, but so like you're talking, let's talk about 16th notes, right? Where does that, how do you get with this, right? And it all fits back to the dynamic etudes that we're talking about. If you guys don't mind, I'm gonna mute you guys again because it's clear. But if you have questions, just let me know. Okay. So I'm talking about 16th note subdivisions, okay? And I'm using the dynamic etude principle, right? So back to the idea of like, let's just stay on one chord for a second, right? So one thing to notice here is even when we're staying on one chord, we actually are still thinking of it as a part of a bigger form. So never forget the form, right? Everything fits in a context of form. We can break this down as far as we need to, but we are always actually still thinking about some form in our head. And so you're picturing right now, seeing all the diagrams a million times, you're seeing that D flat major, sharp 11, 2 beats, that's C7 sharp 9, C7 altered for 2 beats, and that F minor for 4 beats. That's what this is all based on. Right now we're just isolating the D flat and we're just repeating it, and we're going to talk about 16th notes and how we're going to deal with those using that thing, right? Okay, so first of all, if I'm playing this tempo, that's slow 1 E. That's our 1 and 2 and eighth notes, right? 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Where's the first thing? 16ths. Feel them on that one, right? Pick alternate picking. That's free money on your picking, you know? You just do that, you'll instantly get really good at picking. Now do the same thing like this, right? Right. Maybe now start. Notice what I'm doing is I'm playing every 16th note right now. Okay, that's a foreshadowing, but for now I'm going to just stick to kind of doing that for a second. Duh. Notice once again, it's always in 4. There's no escaping it, right? You'd have to be very deliberate to be playing in a different time signature because I'm playing all these different rhythms and they're just always in 4/4. So what I did was I played 16th notes and grouped them in 3s. Now notice I'm still playing every subdivision, so the idea of syncopation now starting to emerge as it's not just space. Syncopation is not just space in like, you know, leaving a rest. It's grouping in subdivisions, grouping subdivisions together that then move against a beat or don't hit on a beat or something like that. So like if I group in 3s, right? 1 E and a 2 E and a, or if I go, right, it hits before the beat, right? So 1 E and. Now if I do 4 16th notes, check this out. Right? A 4 grouping, right? 1 E and a, right? That's a really important one right away because you said it, that last 16th note, that's how you find it, right? That's how you find it, right? So just to get really deep in that, we're talking about this classic notion of when you play a grouping of 4 on a downbeat, it takes you to the subdivision immediately before the next beat. 4 subdivisions, 4 16th notes take up that whole beat before that next downbeat hits. And that location can be found via subdividing either in your mind or on the fretboard with your picking to locate that. So now you're starting to see this thing where it's like, yes, you can locate places. So locate 2nd 16th note of beat 2, you know, 3rd 16th note of beat 4. That's the 8th and of beat 4, right? So 3rd 16th note is the and. 2nd 16th note is immediately between the and the downbeat. 3rd 16th note is immediately between the and the downbeat of the next beat, right? So what we're working on is when we're playing 16th notes, we're just doing things like identifying how those feel with groupings, with picking, with stuff like this, right? Those 4s. Watch I do a 5. This is going to be interesting. I do a 5. Watch what happens. A 5 is normal. It hits on the next downbeat. It just sounds normal, right? Watch what a 6 is, right? Landing on the 2nd 16th note of the 2nd beat, right? 3 E and a, 4 E and a. Right? Now you're building lines, right?
can compound myself, right? I can compound for E and and I know where I'm going, and it's not that hard to actually add in the whole sequence there, right? But what I'm thinking about now is not even really the groupings. I'm just thinking about using like sequences of 4 or 5 notes or whatever, and then probably an 8th note or 16th note of space, and how that affects like something that's moving against, you know, the beat, something that's syncopated, but in a way, maybe in a way of syncopation you haven't quite thought about too much just yet, but it's just a, that's the real variation of syncopation, is like groupings, displacing, right? Marking certain subdivisions within a measure, right? Targeting them and doing it in a, see, here's now where we're getting to that next big can of worms here. It's like what I was just doing was like I didn't really have a big framework or a system. I was just doing the groupings, right? And you can do that, right? Like that's great. People, it's awesome. Like nothing wrong with that, right? But where it goes deeper, and this is where we open the wormhole of composition and practice and how that comes together. It starts right here. That is when we use these things called rhythmic frameworks to create, call it more congruent syncopation. More congruent syncopation. Now, that's subjective theoretically. Congruency is theoretically subjective. But sometimes we use these terms to really kind of grab onto something that we need to grab onto, right? So the idea here with congruency is like this, for example. The simplest congruency. And now I'm going to actually throw out another term to help you understand the congruency. It's also like symmetry versus asymmetry, right? So there's symmetry, there's asymmetry, and there can be congruency in both, okay? There can be congruency in asymmetry because it's still like symmetric enough that you know it's not symmetric, right? But full-blown symmetry, you know, that's congruent too. They're both congruent. Asymmetry is congruent, symmetry is congruent. But what we're talking about with rhythmic frameworks is more dealing with congruent asymmetry, because when you enter the realms of asymmetry, a few different things can happen. One thing that can happen is, oh man, I want to choose my words carefully. One thing that can happen is that you get lost in the chaos of infinite rhythmic possibilities. And an example of that, I want to give an example of a band, but I don't want to like skew your own perspective. Actually, I'll ask you, and I'll even ask you, Jerome, too. But Kate, can you give me an example from your own perspective of when I'm talking about this like asymmetry, regardless of congruence or non-congruence, just thinking about asymmetry, what are some bands that you think of and associate with asymmetry? Or some composers, asymmetry, composers, bands, musicians.
So there's like one band I can kind of think of.
Okay.
Like, oh, why can I? Oh yeah, To Be Gentle. They're kind of their form is weird. Like the first part, it'll be this symmetric pattern for a little bit, but then it will break up those rhythms with like, okay, here's a fast part. Kind of breaking it up into that sort of stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah, yeah.
Because they have that clean, like, okay. And then the next part is. And it's breaking up that rhythm into something funky.
That's awesome, dude. That's perfect.
Sweet.
Okay. That's a really good example. That's because that fits beautifully into everything we're talking about. But here's the part, okay? So this is not super important, but it's going to matter down the line. I'm pretty sure, I'm not 100% sure because I just heard you play a riff for the first time. It sounded really sick. But here's
Thanks.
the thing. If I were to categorize that riff, that actually sounded, and Jerome will tell me if I'm wrong, that sounded like it was fully symmetric. Am I right,
Oh,
Jerome?
okay.
Was that a fully symmetric riff? Dude, you're muted.
It's I wouldn't call. I don't know. It didn't feel asymmetric, but I can't come up with like words to really describe it.
Okay. So okay,
Because
fine. That's cool.
that's actually a hard one to think of when I was thinking of asymmetry. It's like there's elements of Meshuggah that can be asymmetrical, but there's still like an overarching symmetry to it.
Yeah. I know, because the farther you zoom out, the more symmetry you see. When you zoom in is when you see the asymmetry. Absolutely. Okay, so why I thought the riff that Kay just played was symmetric was because it sounded like, well, it was in 4/4, 99.9% sure.
So.
Yeah. Unless I was missing something there, but like it sounded like it was in 4/4, and it was happening over 2-bar phrases in 4/4. But so this is, get ready to like grab onto something. That riff, you're gonna have to grab onto it here. So that riff had a variation that went over 2 bars, and then it repeated in the next 2 bars for a 4-bar phrase. But the rhythm of the 2 bars, that was asymmetric. So 2-bar asymmetry, 2-bar asymmetry, but then it's symmetric over 4 bars. Okay, so that's kind of that's the level you're always needing. So if you zoom out, like on, for example, Meshuggah is textbook symmetrical. No, sorry. Meshuggah is textbook congruent asymmetry. Meshuggah is textbook congruent asymmetry. So when you zoom out on Meshuggah, it looks all symmetric when you zoom out. And that's why if you just listen to it, it's just like 4/4. Every Meshuggah song is always in 4/4. But it sounds like it's not, except for when you don't overthink it, when you're not paying so much attention to like the insanity of the groupings and you just listen to the groove. That's when you notice that it's 4/4. So you kind of zoom out conceptually and you feel that it's 4/4. But when you zoom in conceptually for performance and also listening, your ears, what level are you listening? When you zoom in, it will confuse you into your own grave if you don't take the time to untangle it, you know? But it's like one of those things that the deeper you look, the more you see, but it's congruent. You have to kind of take the spectrum of congruency. So this brings us right to everything, right? So the spectrum of congruency, right? Spectrum of congruency. So how we're going to think about this in general is micro 16th notes. Okay? Micro is going to be on the 16th note level. Okay, so let's just talk about that for a second. Because you can start to imagine, if we zoom out, maybe we're talking about measures of 4/4 or whatever, you know, right? But let's just talk about the 16th notes in 4/4. So the 16th notes are on the micro level, the micro spectrum. So the spectrum is micro, meso, macro. Micro, meso, macro, that's the spectrum. So the spectrum on the smallest level is 16th notes. All right, right? This is all recorded, don't worry.
Yep.
All recorded.
Yeah, I'll look back.
So the 16th notes, all right, there's a fundamental principle, and this is discussed, but probably the first time you've heard about this. They break down always into 3s and 2s. That is the smallest common denominator of rhythm. It's 3s and 2s, right?
Yep.
Now, you could break 2s into 1s, and you could break 3s into 3 1s, right? But we're working with the spectrum framework. We're working with micro components are unequivocally, for practical purposes, 3s and 2s, okay? We can just work with that. That's a really good anchor to just go with, because it blows up. You can, well, what about 16th note triplets? It's like, okay, yeah, I know. This stuff is like, well, just, 16th notes, smallest component. We can do 3s and 2s, okay? So then when we look at 5s, we're like, oh, a 5 is a 3 and a 2, or a 2 and a 3. When we do a 7 is a 2, 2 and a 3, or a 2, 3 and a 2, or a 3 and a 2 and a 2, right? 11 is, a 5 and a 6, or a 3, 3, 3, 2. or a 2-3-3-3, or a 3-2-3-3, or a 3-3-2-3, right? So this is, we're getting into the spectrum framework. We're understanding like the fundamental component of rhythm is 3 and 2 on that micro level, and what we just described with the 11s, that was the macro level. The 13 is the macro level. So I'm finally about to answer the question. You're starting to see this whole thing. So how does 13 work over 4/4? So let's understand this, right? You're with me. I know you're with me, but now I'm about to full circle it, where you just said something about, I think you said something about a tuplet, right? You remember saying that?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So what we're talking about right now are not tuplets.
Yeah.
That's a different
We're just
thing,
worried
but it's
about threes.
in twos in the same subdivision.
Yep,
So let's
and
really
twos.
illustrate that point, right? So threes in the same subdivision, 16th notes, right? The micro is the 16th notes, and I'm grouping them in threes and twos. I could group them in just twos, right? Or I can group them in threes. Or, right, just grouping in threes, all this different stuff, right? So then, if I want to group in that, so that is not a tuplet. It's just a 3 grouping of 16th notes. A 16th notes grouped as 3. So what will be a tuplet,
Yep.
right? So if this is 16, it's literally shifting the speed. That's a different thing. Now, we use that.
Okay.
It connects. There's a full circle. So, like, if you hear, like, 16th notes, right? So, like, 1E and 2E and 1E and 2E and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, right?
Okay.
But I didn't, my foot, I'm not actually good at keeping my foot tapping at the right tempo. My foot should not change tempos. Even if I change, that's one of the challenges. Classic. I've literally written songs based on this exact principle. Like, this is cutting all the way into the center of the universe here. But it's just the idea. There's this thing where, like, when you play tuplets, it's like you just shifted the gear of time, right? Tuplets are shifting the gear of time. You can hear that with, like, 8th notes, right? Or 16th. Oh, those were 16th, right? But these are 8th. 16th. Grouping those 16th notes in 3 sounds like I just shifted the tempo, right? Now, now here's where it really blows, and I'm going to have to, I can shift the tempo, or I keep the same tempo and just let the grouping play out against the backbeat or the beats of the measure. So now we're talking about fundamentals of, like, composition and how rhythm is giving us just understanding what you just understood. Now I'm going to show you where that becomes composition, but really just through this framework of practice.
Okay.
So I said I was going to give you kind of an analogy to really solidify this, but I think so far you probably almost already understand it. Is there any questions of what questions you have at this point, considering everything I just said?
So just breaking everything down into the threes and twos, and then playing that against the backbeat instead of having to change the tempo. You just shift your feeling a little bit, but you're keeping that same constant beat against there.
Exactly.
Sweet.
Yep. So that's where the foot tapping teaches you what that feels like and how deep and complex that can become, right? So if we just start by tapping our foot and playing 6, like 1E and 2, or 1E and 2. I'm wanting to speed up now. That's why I want to speed up. I feel like a little bit faster, right?
Yeah, that's all right.
different path there, right?
Yep.
Right, and I just wanted to break out that to be like, okay, that compounds once again the moment you include different pathway grip sequences, right? But now you're seeing where there's
Yep.
that continuum emerging. That continuum is emerging once you get really solid on those rhythmic basics, right? The fundamentals of rhythm, the bottom, middle, top stuff, and then playing groupings and just experimenting with that. That's what I'm saying. Like I'm tempted to not fully open up that can of worms of rhythmic frameworks in this, because
that's so good.
I think that's enough conceptual stuff, because I think you know how to practice now. There's a huge level that just opened up to you with your practice, and the foreshadowing is that that's going to affect a macro development cycle that's about to hit. So let's just now focus on what I wanted to focus on. When I figured you were going to come today, I'm glad you did. Really glad you did, man. Is just to get into,
of course.
Starting to think about rhythm and how that develops in your practice, and how to start thinking about kind of rhythmic mini compositions of rhythm, small, like improvisational fragments using certain rhythms. So you can start with your 3 against 4, right? You can start by like tapping your foot, like 1 E and a 2 E and a gat, right? And always that classic thing is, the triads are 3 notes, right? And so there's all that stuff. And then when you get into, so they work well with 3s, right? So use the 3s. And the 3 is probably, that's the classic.
Okay.
So here's where there's like a practical level, very practical level, because you already kind of see a practice, but here's what I want to give you for a specific rhythm. So one of the classic congruent asymmetries, like the oldest congruent asymmetry in the world, right? The macro, micro of them all. Now, people think Tool is in all this odd meter stuff, but like this is like 80% of their riffs are this 4/4 rhythm. And it's what I call the 3/3/2 rhythm. I've made a lot of videos about this.
Okay.
You can see where it is like, I'm just talking about, 3s and 2s are the smallest subdivisions, right? What's the most classic rhythm of like every rock song? At least like Tool type rock, maybe Incubus type rock, Alice in Chains type rock, would be like this rhythm, the 3/3/2 rhythm. So this is like, if I've got 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2. That's the oldest asymmetry there is, right? 4 E and a.
Okay.
Got right. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2. So if you understand that, use that with your practice. So start using. What did I do at the end there? I changed the grouping, right?
Yep. Yeah.
I change it. How did I change it? I change it according to literally the note sequencing choice.
Okay.
That's the big connection. Is your groupings are a byproduct of the way that you're sequencing the notes in the given grip or pathway or configuration, right?
Okay.
So if you group a triad naturally, it's just always a 3 naturally.
Yep.
And then I just do that too, right? So I'm going 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2.
1 2. Yep.
And I'm feeling that 3 move against my foot, that second 3 move against my foot, and then realigning on the last beat before the next cycle, right? That's the 3/3/2.
Okay.
It's that. It's the perfect example of congruent asymmetry, right? It's asymmetric over 3 beats, but then it's symmetric because it still aligns with 4/4, right? And then you can double it, right? So you can double it where your riff is. What I mean by doubling it is I'm just playing it to represent the entire amount of time that's happening during that harmonic moment, right? Right. So I'm using that rhythm as the melody of that specific, because it's this amount of time, right? It's like,
Yep.
2, 3. If I want to fill it up, right?
Yep.
See, man, like this practice never gets old, right?
Yeah.
You can really like, because what you'll do is you're starting to see how there's a natural inclination to speed up. That's part of it, right? As you
Yep.
develop with your technique and it becomes easier, you'll just naturally speed up. So that's the thing, is like kind of the last icing on the cake of this lesson would just be that, like, definitely don't like force technique. Let technique emerge
Yeah.
just like that. You will literally
Okay.
reach like Alan Holdsworth level, like you'll reach the highest level of technique. Here's the thing, it takes years to really understand what I mean about this, but technique only happens when you stop trying to get technique. Obviously, right? Obviously, that's how it works.
Yeah.
So what that really means is just look at the basic building blocks of, music, the triads, the inversions, the melodies, the voice leading, and then you're adding some chromatics, you're adding some tetrachords, you're adding some pentatonics. Maybe you're adding some seventh chord arpeggios. Maybe later though.
Yep.
But if you just
Yeah.
focus on those musical ideas and how they conveniently lay on the fretboard and get used to these shapes, that's all of your technique. You don't need any other technique. That's all it is, right? Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because it will just continue to build off of all the other stuff too. But you have to be able to support your playing with the technique, so it just kind of naturally goes with it. So you don't really have to focus on it as long as you're practicing the right stuff that helps it to move forward with the playing.
And what is that right stuff? It's that compositional mindset where you're composing those mini rhythms,
Yep.
sequencing some pathways through mini rhythms. Let that expand gradually. There's no rush, But when you're ready to think about some bigger rhythms, we'll talk about them. That's where we bring the MIDI in. Obviously, think about the MIDI as like a tool that allows us to think about some really crazy rhythms. And that's when you start to be able to write, some of the deepest cutting stuff, is when you leverage that to kind of expose yourself systematically through rhythmic frameworks and the creation of rhythmic frameworks, new rhythms that you would not necessarily imagine or fathom, but you would generate as a result of a larger framework that you've already created. If that makes sense, there are levels of that, because you're creating frameworks and you're creating compositions using frameworks. So there's multiple layers of composition that are woven. One framework could be one album, or it could be one band, or it could be one song. Like frameworks. Could be one riff. Could be one riff. One framework could be one riff. But yeah, so that's another micro, macro stuff, all that spectrum stuff. But I would say we covered all the things that need to be covered for sure. What questions? What you guys, where you're at?
I mean, it's sounding pretty good. It's starting to click definitely in the brain, because it's definitely different than anything I've done, but that's really what you need to break through, like, those plateaus of being stuck, because there's so many people posting all the same stuff.
Yeah.
But you don't learn how to apply it practicing that stuff, and it's starting to click now that we have a process to practice it in, and then you see the end goal as you just move slightly up your little process of practicing and adding and taking away some of that first stuff, and it just keeps moving.
Nail it, dude. Nail it.
Sweet.
So you know what your practice is. You're still working with dynamic etudes, and I'll encourage you to be as patient as you have fun, dude. I mean, this is like the best process.
Yeah.
You're so young,
Sweet.
dude. You're gonna become a freaking genius at this stuff so fast, man. Like here's the thing. I wasn't thinking this way until probably like 2018.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. You know what I mean? So this is like, I'm trying to give people the benefit of like just starting learning the proper way immediately, right?
Yeah. And then, because I can see where everything is going from all of this basic stuff. Like it might not make totally sense, but I can kind of see where that end goal is with all of this right here.
Yeah. And you're starting to see, we have components that are really helpful as we dig deeper. We have anchor points.
Yep.
Scaffolding, obviously, scaffolding that, like as you said, you're using it and letting it go every step of the way. So you'd identified that's like part of it, right? So if you do something, you may only have to understand it for like a specific scenario, but that is a compounding process, right? Because as you do that, you get the ability to do that more often and faster, to the point where it compounds exponentially, and then that's like what improvisational technical expansion is. So you can start to imagine that technique at a high level, like a Frank Gambale, Alan Holdsworth level, is constantly evolving as a result of just knowing how to juggle up all the combinations, and already having gone through the practice of developing the technique to do that at a slow level, at a faster level, at a real time level, right? Compounding exponential, you know?
Yeah, it's making sense.
Yeah, man.
I did have one question, like kind of about the chromatic pivoting from the fretboard mastery course too, because I was understanding. Let me grab this right here. The three shapes with the patterns right there.
That's such a good start, man.
And then, like with the chromatic pivoting, we were doing F minor in that video you got on there. So and then that was what, like a full measure of that.
Yeah.
And then we're just going to that E, and that's the chromatic pivot right there, right?
And then what's the common tone though? What's the common tone that you're pivoting from in that case?
Oh, let's see. So F. Off of the root right here, because we're going that F to the E.
So that's the thing. What's the definition of the pivot? The pivot is the common tone between the chords that are chromatic half step away. So from F minor to E, those chords are a half step away, but they're linked.
Oh, it's that third right there, because there's the E. One.
They have the same third.
5 right there.
They have the same third. So this becomes like some of the most beautiful, this kind of practice from like this classic one, right? From F minor. Sorry. I'll do that again.
Yeah, you're right.
So the chromatic pivoting is using a common tone to connect two different chords, and then systematically learning that on the fretboard, and how the actual first principle, like triad connections of the Ancient of Days, connect on that simple logic, which is a beautiful musical exercise, right? It's that's why it's so powerful, because it shows you how to make like epic, beautiful music, right? But on a deeper level, that's giving you like your basic subdivision concept, like all of the pathways that you need for any set of subdivisions, regardless of how long, right? So, you know what I'm saying, right? So, there's a few things to consider with that, but think about this would be that when we're working on the form, right? We're working on a D flat 2 beats, C7 2 beats, F minor 4 beats, right? We'll imagine some other kind of form, like where it was like F minor for 2 measures, E major for 2 measures, right? That happens, right? And it's not that you would necessarily, it's not that you would do like, every, I'm saying that like that was a beautiful musical exercise by myself, but in actual context, you're not going to play every subdivision. I'm practicing it by playing it, but where this like, where the performance aspect is, or even the composition, you're writing a solo, you're going to perform a solo, you're improvising a solo. It's this stuff like, what I do at the end, I played scale notes. I purposely want to show you what happens when you
Yep.
play scale notes. And you're like, whoa, like I just
Yeah.
heard scales because I was already contextualizing with triads. So that's a foreshadowing, but it's an important one
Perfect.
because you're going to see
Mhm.
how that's why it's fretboard mastery, dude. That is why it's fretboard mastery, because that is the basic fretboard science that allows you to then just build on top of it with tetrachords, pentatonics,
Uh-huh.
chromatics, full-blown scales. It's not hard to start doing three,
Yeah.
obviously, right? Like all this
Yep.
stuff is right. Obviously, that's what it's
Yeah.
building up to. But
Yep.
notice what I just played. That is so not nearly as sick as this. I went to the 5 chord. And you could see I was
Yep.
doing a different fingering because we talked about the 5 chords in fretboard mastery. So I just want to show that,
Yep.
right? There's 2 directions: chromatic pivoting and the 5 chords
Mhm.
of the chromatic pivoting. You saw that, but obviously there's a lot in there.
Yep.
Don't hesitate to go
Yeah.
back on that one. But
Yeah.
I just showed you everything that's in there, nothing beyond that.
Yeah. Yep. And then, so like what you're doing right there. So I was just doing it off of the right here, off the third. But let's say we're doing it off of the third. Right here, it would be the same thing. You're just starting to do the, or yep, the major right there, and or.
Yeah, you're gonna find it.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
There you go.
Wait.
Yeah, so
So
you're
there's
like just to
one right there, and then
Yep.
we could make the major off of that right there.
be dead. Exactly.
Oh, there
There
we
you
go.
go.
All right,
There you
yeah, now I
go.
can see it clicking a little bit.
Yeah, you'll find it in
And
2
that's
seconds.
just the, yeah, that's shape. There, right there. Okay.
You're getting it.
Because then you're just
getting it.
switching off of that third right there. And then,
Mm-hmm.
like how you're saying with the fifth, if you wanted to expand this, you would go from the fifth, so B from E. You
Yup.
would do that.
And you would find which
But then
inversion. Is it second inversion, first inversion, blah, 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 whatever.
Oh, yeah, what connects it off of the,
Yeah,
what,
if it's
just the
from
root
E.
note. So
Yeah, like whatever note you are on E.
So this is coming from, oh, let's see, A flat.
Mhm.
So B, D, F, A, so, or B, D, F.
B, D, F sharp.
Would it be
B,
this?
D, it would be B,
Oh,
D
B, D.
sharp, F sharp, major triad, B, D sharp, F sharp, but you're getting it. It's good. This is good. This is important work. You're
Yeah.
doing the work. You're doing the right exact. You just ask these questions. You'll find it out.
Yep. Okay, so just, I definitely need to go back through because, like, with triads, just memorizing, like, okay, major C, E, G, minor C, E flat, G. So off the top of my head, I can be like, okay, B major, B flat, or B, D, F. Okay, there's F sharp, and then, oh, what was it? D sharp too, because it's diminished. Yeah, so B, D sharp, F sharp right there.
B, D sharp, F sharp. Yeah, no, because it's a major triad. It's a B major
Yep.
triad. And yeah, it just so happens, right, the way the dice falls. So just notice something here, right? B major triad, it's this shape, right? That's one shape. I'm playing 1,
Yep.
3, 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, that's just that B major triad, but it's like an E major triad is the exact same shape, right?
Uh-huh.
Same exact shape, but for some reason the E is E, G sharp, B. The B is B, D sharp, F sharp, all this different stuff. The C is the same shape. C, E, G. Like, how does all the sharps and flats work?
Yep.
You'll figure all that out. Don't overthink it too much, but just, you're
Okay.
referencing the piano. You're referencing the piano with that stuff. And
Yep.
more importantly now is trust that is a byproduct of first just seeing the actual shapes on the fretboard, right? You see B major
Okay.
triad by seeing this classic triad shape. And now I'm showing you through fretboard mastery and all this other stuff, all these other classic triad shapes, right? So those are the only shapes that matter. You don't need to worry about the D flats, like just see that the same shapes are occurring in all the keys on the fretboard.
Okay.
Like, how did that happen? Just a cosmic miracle or something like that. But if we use the fretboard as the reference point for the intervallic sequencing, right? We don't need to get up in the weeds of D sharp, F sharp. I've seen this happen many times before.
Yeah.
You will automatically understand sharps and flats automatically. You don't need to overthink it. It's automatic. You already look at standard notation. All that stuff is just, don't even worry about it. Focus for now on shapes, fretboard shapes, as related to all this different stuff, right? Because you can see how fretboard mastery and dynamic etudes, that's all the same stuff. It's just different angles on the same first principles, right? Fretboard geometry being like the fundamentals of practical performance theory, right? And it comes at it with, okay, so full circling back to the idea, it's like, well, you got the small form of D flat major 7, C7, 2 beats of those, and then you have the longer form where you chromatic pivot over a longer form, and then the only thing that matters is the whole point of everything is making the connections from one chord to the next, right? So if you're playing a longer form with from E major 2 beats to E minor 2 beats or whatever, the whole point would be to make sure you slam from that E major to that E minor. That's the point. If you miss that, that's the point, right? And you can do it in a lot of different ways, but that's why we work on harmonic sequences such as this. So we can hear that. So we can focus on the movement, the change, right? And even if we're staying static, if we're saying like I'm still like thinking about the change as being like the primary thing that's getting me ready to make the movement. I can settle in on a rhythm, and if I'm practicing, I will do that, right? And those get infinitely complex, but I'm always thinking about, well, what's the next thing? And then that's why we're always thinking of a form. Whether it's a simple form like 1-5-1, 1-5. This. Scalar note, always noticed, like, anyway, so I'm saying that was a form. I was doing form practice. Right? Same level. Those were dynamic etudes that just turn into base level language, right? That's all.
Okay. So like going back to that E to B, you would just think, it's the fifth. You're pivoting off of the fifth of that first chord right there.
Nailed it, dude.
Instead of thinking, and then you kind of just naturally see that on the fretboard a little bit.
Naturally, like, but with practice and with work, right? It's not just going to happen automatically. But what I would say is the biggest thing is like when you're doing the 5-1s, right? Just like you got chromatic pivoting, you got 5 pivoting. That's a good way to think about it. I didn't actually think about that, but yeah, you got chromatic pivoting, you got 5 pivoting, because that, of course. So think about it this, like, to get really simple about it, which is a good way, I recommend being simple about it, is just notice that the 5 chord of whatever key, so in E, the 5 chord, relative to the root of E, it's going to be second inversion. It's going to be off the 5th. It's going to start on the 5th. So you just want to start to get familiar with the second inversion, right? You just be like, oh, there's my second inversion. And then you just like realize it's almost the same as the first inversion. It just or the root position of the first inversion. It just starts on one note different. So it's like, this is second inversion B, right? That's second inversion B. But this is root position B. It's the same freaking thing, right? But it's all about what note you start on. The starting point when you're doing fretboard mastery, dynamic etude, the starting note, or the the transition note rather. So like for example, right, this kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm playing E minor, right? I meant to go. The note that I'm changing from one harmonic movement to the next is what makes it interesting. Like the attention to detail
Mm-hmm.
and focusing on that as like sort of the interesting focus point. Everything else just supporting that. That's a huge mentality consideration. Is all.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I see what
Yeah,
you're
man.
talking about now.
There's
Sweet.
there's a ton there, man. There's so much to practice with all of the stuff that I'm like. But this is good. You want to lay that groundwork of like, okay, now you know how to think about practice. You gotta start
Yep.
practicing. You'll know when you're ready to try some bigger forms, but start really small, committing to the form you're working on. Commit to that dynamic etude. Master a few different dynamic etudes through that form.
Okay.
And when you've got a
Mm-hmm.
few of those, and you can send me like a few different recordings, maybe like 3 or 4 of those, very just like getting
Sweet.
to improvisation or composition, either one's fine. But like
Okay.
a few recordings of them, a few different passes, a few different variations on a few different dynamic etude pathway configurations, and then it's worth it, man. It's worth it because you're laying the bulletproof, unshakable foundation right now that
Yep.
will serve you for the actual rest of your life in terms of composition, creative awareness, creative development.
Yeah.
It starts with this exact mental process that you're going through like relatively quickly because you're not a beginner and you also think about teaching, so it connects to how you
Mm-hmm.
think. I think
Yep.
a lot of people are usually like fair bit more confused than you are at this point, so I can tell
Yeah.
that like you're onboarding it quickly because you're thinking about like, okay, like what's how can I explain this, how can I use this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the
Because
key.
you have to be able to break it down into so many different levels
Mm-hmm.
so anybody can pick it up off of
You know
no
it.
matter where they're at. Exactly. So you have to know it so deeply to where you can go, okay, well, here's the basics.
Mm-hmm.
Here's one step up from that. Here's one step below that, or wherever you need to go, depending on the person you're talking to.
Nice, man. Nice. Yeah, that's it, man. You know it. You know it. You will be. Yeah. Keep thinking about that stuff in your teaching. That's going to be massive. But that was exactly correct. Nailed it.
Perfect.
Nailed it, dude. Big picture framework. All this
Yep.
different stuff. So yeah, this is gonna be recorded. I'm gonna send you this recording. I think if you need it,
Okay.
there'll be some like notes for it. But I'll send it to you
Yeah, that
because
sounds good.
there's definitely plenty to reference and go back to, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Um, and then last kind of thing I was thinking. So when you're
Mm-hmm.
saying second inversion doing from that fretboard mastery, are you talking
Mm-hmm.
about the second inversion? Or that's first inversion, so second inversion. Wait.
Nice.
Oh,
That you just played
yeah,
an
second
open second
inversion.
inversion
Yep.
on E. Did you play it?
Um, I think so.
Yeah, you play a second inversion open E,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So notice how like those particular triad configurations you're playing, they're
Hmm.
kind of the other end of the spectrum from fretboard mastery. It's
Yeah.
both. They're the same logic, but like when I think of fretboard mastery, I don't think about inversions as much. That's not the point. Fretboard
Okay.
mastery is more on the side of pathways,
Uh
but you
huh.
will acknowledge like just inevitably you'll be like, oh, if I play a root freaking position E minor,
Uh huh.
right? I start on the low string and I just play. Then I know that the one I have to do for the 5 in that
Yep.
particular situation
Hmm.
is B in second inversion because it starts here. Plays
Okay.
some. You got to be careful with those scale notes if you yeah. But yeah, you can see what I'm doing though is I'm playing like the obvious thing, right? So depending on the
Yep.
actual location, I don't overthink that stuff because that's the point is you don't
Yeah.
you shouldn't. It's just there to support your rhythm. Like the melody
Okay.
choice and the inversion choice and that stuff, that's not the point. That's just like kind of the harmonic material which is finite that's just what you're dressing up the rhythm with. The rhythm is really like the actual infinite, you know, that's what you want to focus on. So we're getting that really, really
Yeah.
strong understanding of harmony, fretboard mastery, because
Hmm.
we're just going to play rhythms with it. We're going to write epic solos with it, improvise insane rhythms with it. That's where it blows sky high. Resequencing, rhythm, syncopation,
Sweet.
systematic macro rhythms, all that stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Sweet. Yeah, sounds good. That's pretty much the last thing I was thinking about, that like fretboard mastery stuff, because
That's
I've
awesome.
just needed a little bit of move forward for that, because I think they kind
Perfect.
of go hand in hand with each other.
Oh yeah. I'm glad you
Practice
see
one,
that.
practice the other,
I'm glad you
and
see
then
that.
they both build for different aspects a little bit. They
Nailed it.
work at the same
Yeah,
aspects, but they kind of move off in their own directions a little
they
bit
do.
every, yeah,
You're
just a little
exactly
bit.
right. I think that's perfect. I think you
Sweet.
completely understand the mentality of those two dimensions of the same thing. Absolutely, that's exactly what
Perfect.
it is. So good. So yeah. So it's like it's
Nice.
clear. It's clear what your practice is and kind of like the mentality of practice, where you are on that journey right now. I think all that stuff is clear. So that's what I'm saying. Like next step, I want you to just kind of make some recordings, like phone, whatever. Don't overthink it. You know, just some recordings of you just passing through um, that form, right? And I would say for now,
Uh-huh.
just focus still on the 2-bar form. Don't go full blown just the two of us. We'll go that soon enough, but
Yeah.
just focus now
Okay.
on the short D flat, D flat C, F minor, and start in different ones, right? If you start in first inversion,
Hmm.
open D, um, that's going to take you a certain path. You start root position D, open D. That's going
Okay.
to take you path, and then also
Okay.
mix and match open closed, right? So those are all the things to think
Okay.
about, right, in that practice. So that's why it's don't only think about the 2 bars, because if you can get all that
Yep.
stuff integrated in those 2 bars, well, again, what have you done? You've created an understanding that will take you
Perfect.
to every single harmonic realm you'll ever enter. It starts with what you're doing with
Yeah.
just those 2 bars. With the triads, the
Yep.
grips of the triads, the voice leading, and all the rhythmic possibilities are a result of just mapping out those pathways over that specific form. You can
Hmm.
see fretboard mastery hiding and lurking in the distance. But right now we're just with those like grips on just that. And if you can start to think about
Yeah.
fretboard mastery in that context, well then impressive. But don't, you know,
Uh-huh.
that's part of it. But just, you know, don't worry about that for the first little bit you're doing. Just work it only on the,
Okay.
you know, the single triad grips. Like you got grips and you got pathways. Fretboard
Yep.
mastery is pathways.
Yep.
Triadic configurations are grips. So the pathways are not too worried about yet, but I'm glad you're
Okay.
starting to think about them. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, and you need the grips in order to get the pathways, because if you start on a different inversion, it's going to lead you somewhere else entirely than if
uh
you
huh,
started on second inversion.
exactly.
Okay.
And I would say that the grips are the more practical. They're the more practical ones, right?
Uh-huh.
As you get more
Yep.
absurd in your musical development, you play more notes and more subdivisions. Well, then the pathways of fretboard mastery start to make a ton of sense, like Holdsworth level sense. But right now, it's just like,
Yeah.
dude, you can hardly imagine a world where you need that stuff, but you will imagine it soon enough. Because
Yep.
you've heard plenty of like epic music, so you know it's like, well, this stuff can go crazy. But the key to understand is that like
Yeah.
all of that complexity is really just like simple derivatives of these first principles, which are triad configurations, open close, sequencing opening close triad configurations through a form, applying rhythm, this
Yeah.
process that compounds on different levels. You know what to do. You know what to do. You're definitely
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
definitely
I see
on the
what to
path.
go for these. Sweet. Yeah, I'll get some videos sent over just
Yeah,
of
man.
other ways of the same stuff right here.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Make music. You know, take your time. Give yourself like a few
Yep.
days. You know, or whatever. Or whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
whatever. You do whatever you want. But I'm saying like, when I'm gonna give you the next lesson, just feel like you're ready for something more when you're like, okay, I'm ready to, because we're gonna go through like, it's gonna get like, no, it's gonna get hard, but it's gonna be like, oh, that's like a bit of a leap there. But yeah, we're gonna start taking some leaps. So
Yeah.
just be really solid on this, because that's like, you know, I'm not to overstate it or not to understate it. That is like most of you're doing like insanely important work. So you can take a few days. You know, it hasn't even been a week yet, but
Yeah.
you know, But you
Yeah,
move at
for
your
real.
pace. Move at your own pace. It makes sense. I'm not surprised that you're like getting all this stuff, but you are moving insanely fast. Is all you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do want to slow it down definitely because it's like it's not entirely in memory yet. I can
Perfect.
think
Yeah.
of all of the shapes. It takes a second to make them depending on what chord I'm trying to base it off of. And doing it off the strict 3 chords for right now, it really nails seeing those
That's
on
the
the
key.
fretboard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and now I
That's
just
what.
need to do it from the one that's in the lesson video, apply it to the other ones, so I can start seeing it in my own process too.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Nice. Yeah, you nailed it, dude. You know what to do. Yeah, good, good,
Yep.
good. So I'm glad you can see that. Yeah, like take your time. It's not small things we're dealing with. The implications are
Yeah.
really, really staggering. So yeah,
Yep.
that's good. You shouldn't have it memorized yet. I'd be surprised if you did. So
Yeah.
take time and then start thinking about, okay, am I ready to check out some other grip sequencing? You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Right. On the same
Yeah.
form, on the same progression, some other grip sequencing, but different rhythms, but same parameter set, just with some mixing and matching different pathways, different grips, not pathways, different
Yeah.
grips. But anyway, that's
Yep.
it, dude. That's good. We're good. I'm gonna send you this as
Sweet.
a reference, and it's there if you need it, and let me know if you need anything. And yeah, like I said, send me some
Yeah.
stuff anytime, but never a rush at this point.
Yep.
Good.
Sweet. Yeah, sounds good with
Awesome.
me.
Epic stuff, Cade. Good. I'm glad you're
All
here,
right.
man. It's fun. It's fun. We're gonna do some epic work.
Yeah, thanks.
I'll see you
It's
soon,
been a
man.
lot of fun.
Come to any calls,
Yep, I'll see
obviously,
you
too,
soon.
because it will just reference.
Yeah.
We're just, you're just reinforcing more stuff. A lot of people are going to be coming and talking about this kind of stuff over, I suspect, the next like couple weeks. So it will be like close
Sweet.
to your level for the most part. So if you come to any of that stuff, you'll be well up to speed for sure. That will be helpful, definitely.
Sweet.
It could go
Yeah,
way over your
that
head
works
too
with
when
me.
we get into like Coltrane sequencing and stuff. That can happen, but you would at least on a surface level be like, okay, yeah, he's just talking about a way down the line version of what I'm doing, So,
Yeah, and it kind of gives some more perspective, which is definitely helpful when you're practicing this stuff to see this harder stuff and
where it
kind
goes.
of analyze it to the base stuff that you already know. Or like
Nailed
if you recognize an open grip, whatever, you can see it in a practical situation instead of just in exercises, which can be practical, but it's not, or because it all sounds pretty musical. But
yeah, it does. Because why does it sound musical? Because what you're doing, you're playing a good old fashioned harmonic sequence, right? It's a song. It's a part of a song. That's why it sounds good. So if you come to another call and we're talking about insane stuff, all we're talking about is other harmonic sequences and like crazy ones. That's it. But we're talking about triad configurations through this crazy harmonic sequence or that crazy harmonic sequence. But it's just like you already know harmonic sequencing. You're always using triad configurations. And the more complex the harmonic sequencing becomes, the more you rely on the triad configurations. So it's like there's that advanced beginner full circle. There's something there.
Yep.
But you got it. So I'm saying just come to anything. I don't think you'll ever be that confused, even if we're talking about some crazy stuff. But yeah, man, I'd love to see you around, and I'm glad you're here. I'm glad stuff's settling, man.
Yeah, I'll keep coming around. So
sick. Good stuff, man. Well, I'll talk to you soon, kid. Have a good one.
Wow. You actually watched the entire thing? Okay, well, guess what? You get a reward for doing that. So for everyone who is at this part of the video, he's like, what is this, like an hour and a half later or something? I'm going to give you $100 off of your subscription to Systems for Creation, right? So you can see the link below to join Systems for Creation. You see what that price is. But if you're watching this, book a call with me. In the link below, you'll see where to book a call. Tell me you watched to the end where I told you that you get a $100 discount off of every month, not just your first month, but I'm going to lock you in at $100 lower than what the current price is, right? So book a call, tell me you watched to the end of this video, and we'll hook that up, get you into school, turn you into a freaking genius of music somewhere around, 4 to 5 months, right? That's on average how long it takes. Although I will say I got a couple guys who have completed this program in like 2 months. because they're very motivated. It's 100% self-paced curriculum. You take advantage of those resources, you can blaze through that thing, right? And so obviously the faster you move through it, the less money you have to spend, but you're going to get a master's level education from Systems for Creation. All right, good. See you on the call.